Between them, BMW's Z3 and Mercedes' SLK accounted for more than 600,000 small two-seaters, and the two companies disagreed about nearly everything, starting with whether the car should be built in Germany at all. BMW started building the Z3 on the 20th of September, 1995. Mercedes had the SLK in production less than a year later. The car that outlasted the whole argument was on neither company's plan, and the board that finally approved it was shown a finished car it had already refused to pay for. BMW had been working on its Roadster since 1991 under Burkhard Gerschel. Joji Nagashima, who had drawn the E363 series, finished the Z3's exterior in the middle of 1992. 39 months then went by before the first car was built to wear that shape, and the design was frozen about a year into the wait. Mercedes had begun in the same year BMW did. The drawings started under Bruno Sacco in 1991, and by 1993 they were with Michael Mohr and Murat Gunak. The German design patent went in on the 30th of September that year. Turin saw the first concept early in 1994, and Paris got a second one before the year was out. SLK stands for Sportlich, Leicht, Kurz, which is German for sporty, light, and short. Helmut Werner had become chief executive of Mercedes-Benz on the 27th of May, 1993, and the Roadster was one of the cars he put his name to, along with the A-Class and the M-Class. BMW got its own paperwork in the following year. The German design patent for the Z3 was filed on the 2nd of April, 1994, and the American one on the 27th of September. What BMW spent those 39 months on was happening in South Carolina. On the 23rd of June, 1992, Eberhard von Kuenheim, then chairman of BMW, announced that the company would build its first full assembly plant outside Germany in South Carolina. As the story has been told since, Helmut Pankow, who was running BMW's American operations, went looking for land with the governor's office. He came back with a site at Anderson, next to a rail line, with room to expand into. Von Kuenheim turned it down. He wanted the plan on the interstate, where people driving past would see it, and close to the airport. One site answered that description, and about 250 homes were standing on it. South Carolina paid to be chosen. Legislation signed by Governor Carroll Campbell was reported to provide $35 million, with a further $5 million promised in tax incentives. BMW committed $600 million of its own, along with 2,000 jobs by the end of the decade and at least 9 suppliers inside the state. All of those figures come from a single account, rather than from an audited record. The first BMW built in America was a 318i, and it came off the line on the 8th of September, 1994. Z3 production started a year and 12 days after that. The building that would produce Nagashima's shape had gone up while the shape sat waiting for it. The Z3 became the first BMW model built solely outside Germany, with more than 60% of its parts made in North America. Mercedes built its Roadster at Bremen, with no new factory riding on the outcome. Its bet was one piece of engineering, and that piece sat over the driver's head. The finished car appeared at Turin on the 22nd of April, 1996, after pre-production testing that had begun the previous October. Mass production started that July at Bremen, and the roof was what everybody looked at. The Vario roof is a steel hardtop, cut in two across the middle. The two halves are linked so they fold over each other and drop into the boot, and a mechanism locks them down when the roof is up. The whole movement takes 25 seconds in either direction. Mercedes developed the mechanism with an outside partner, rather than entirely in-house. Before the first production car was built, 30 prototypes were each made to open and close their roofs 20,000 times. The test crew at Bremen spent months with a building full of cars, doing nothing but taking their own roofs off and putting them back on, so that the roof in a customer's driveway would still work years later. The idea was 64 years old by the time Mercedes got to it. Georges Paulhan, born in 1902, was a dentist in Paris who drew cars in his spare time. He applied for a patent on a retractable metal roof in 1931 and was granted it, number 733.380, on the 5th of July, 1932. He called the system Eclipse, From 1933 until 1938, he worked with the coach builder Marcel Portu. The Peugeot 401D of 1934 was the first coupe convertible to use his mechanism. Peugeot bought the patent the year after, and its 402 Eclipse became the first power retractable hardtop, a factory put into production. Paulhan then went to Rolls-Royce and Bentley, where he drew the Ambiricos Bentley and the Corniche prototype. He stayed with them into 1939. In July of 1940, he began working for the Alibi Network on behalf of British intelligence. Somebody betrayed him, and he was arrested in 1941. He was executed in March of 1942, and France gave him the Croix de Guerre and the Médaille de la Résistance after his death. Ford got there next. The 1957 Fairlane 500 Skyliner was the first mass-produced retractable hardtop, engineered under Gil Spears, and the mechanism had originally been drawn for the 1956 Continental Mark II before it ended up on a Ford. Close to 50,000 Skyliners were sold across the years it was offered. What Mercedes did in 1996 was make one that held together in volume. It built 300,000 cars around its version, and the rest of the industry copied that one, rather than Paulhan's or Ford's. Mercedes had the roof it wanted. The engine anyone would have expected to find in front of it would not fit in the nose. The engines Mercedes used in the C280 and the C36 were too big for the SLK's nose. Rather than a 6, the company took the 2.3-liter four-cylinder it already had and bolted a supercharger to it. A roots blower makes its power low down, where a driver spends most of the time. It also heats the air going in enough that the car needs an intercooler to bring the temperature back down. The badge on the boot lid said Compressor, and Mercedes liked the word enough to put it on ordinary saloons for the next 10 years. The roof was what stopped people in the street. A buyer could stand in a car park and watch it take itself apart and fold into the boot in 25 seconds. And in 1996, almost nobody had seen a car do that. In European tune, the SLK 230 Coupe press or made 193 PS and 280 Newton meters. It went from rest to 100 kilometers an hour in 7.3 seconds. Cars sold in America were quoted at 185 horsepower. That engine is still most of the SLK. Of every R170 Mercedes built, the 230 Compress or accounts for 160,000, a little over half the entire production run. Below the 230 sat a plain SLK 200 making 136 PS and a supercharged SLK 200 Compress, or at 192. Together, those two came to a little over 112,000 cars, which is a lot of people buying the roof and taking whatever engine came with it. The 6-cylinder car, the SLK, had gone, without arrived in 2000 as the SLK 320, 4 years into its life, with 218 PS. Mercedes built 33,000 of them in the time the car had left, a long way behind what the supercharged Ford did. Mercedes facelifted the car in the same year the 6 arrived. New bumpers and a new grille went on. The taillights changed, the sills were painted body color, and the indicators moved into the mirrors. Inside, there were better seats. The stability control was upgraded, and the fuel tank went from 45 liters to 53. AMG's version came the year after that, with 354 PS and a 5.2-second run to 100, by which time the fight it had been built for was almost finished. Mercedes built 4,333 of them, and just over 2,000 went to the United States. 979 stayed in Germany. 263 found buyers in Britain, and about 1,000 went to other markets. BMW's argument for the Z3 was made somewhere else, and a lot of people bought the car before they ever drove one. 2 blue prototypes went to a film production in January of 1995, months before the Z3 was available anywhere. GoldenEye premiered at Radio City Music Hall in New York on the 13th of November that year. The same day, BMW presented the Z3 to the press in Central Park, with Pierce Brosnan there and Desmond Llewellyn, who played Q. 20 Z3s were parked near the theater that evening. In the film, Q runs through what the car can do. There are Stinger missiles behind the headlights, a parachute braking system, a radar scanner, an ejector seat, and a self-destruct. None of the gadgets gets used in the film. Bond drives the car once in one short sequence to meet a CIA contact called Jack Wade, and then the car leaves the story. It was the first non-British production car to serve as Bond's main car, and a section of the audience was annoyed about that at the time. BMW sold the car around the film more than in it. That Christmas, the Neiman Marcus catalog carried a James Bond edition, Z3 at $35,000 in Atlanta blue with a light leather interior, 007 badging and a numbered plaque. 2 tickets to a GoldenEye dinner in Los Angeles with Brosnan came with the car. BMW had planned on a small number, and the orders overshot it quickly. The run was capped at 100 cars, 50 manual and 50 automatic, each with 007 in the vehicle identification number. Jay Leno had one on The Tonight Show. Advertising tied to the film ran worldwide from November of 1995 into March of the following year. Harvard Business School wrote the launch up as a teaching case, number 597-002, published in February of 1997. Robert J. Dolan and Susan M. Fournier wrote it, which is how a Roadster ended up on a syllabus. BMW says the entire 1996 model year, more than 15,000 Roadsters, was spoken for before the first one reached a dealer. An enthusiast archive that tracks the American figures counts 15,040 sold in the United States in 1996, though that is an archive and not the company. What BMW had built for those buyers was more interesting than the campaign, and one part of it had already been replaced everywhere else in the range. The Z3 sits on the E36 5 compact platform, which is a shortened version of the floor under the regular 3 Series. At the back, BMW used the semi-trailing arm layout from the older E30 instead of the E36's newer multi-link because it packaged better in a short car. The Z3 often gets called a rebodied E30. The floor pan and the front end are E36 compact, so that description falls apart on inspection. BMW put a superseded rear axle under a brand new model and never replaced it across the nearly 300,000 cars that followed. A semi-trailing arm swings the wheel through an arc as the suspension moves, so the angle the tire makes with the road keeps changing while the car is loaded up in a corner. It soaks up a bad road comfortably, then runs out of grip earlier than the ride quality has led you to expect. Owners and testers have been saying that about the Z3 since the car was new. The back of it goes quiet in your hands before it lets go, which is the opposite of what you want from a small Roadster on a wet road. BMW's answer came with the 1999 facelift. The rear track went out by 2.5 inches, about 64 millimeters. The same update brought chrome rings around the headlights, L-shaped tail lights, stability control in place of the old traction system, and a 3-layer roof with a proper headlining. The M cars kept the old body and took none of the exterior changes. The ordinary engines ran from a 1.8 up to a 3-liter, which is a spread of 116 PS at the bottom to 231 at the top. The 1.9 near the bottom of that range made 140. Roughly 134,000 Z3s left the factory as 4-cylinder cars, a little under half of everything built, which is more 4-cylinder Z3s than the straight 6 reputation suggests. Those cars were called underpowered from the beginning, and the people who bought at the bottom of the range have been complaining about hills ever since. The M with the straight 6 was 2 different cars depending on where you bought it. The M Roadster sold in America between 1997 and 2000 used the S52 engine at 243 PS. Anyone buying the same car in Germany got the S50, and about 80 PS more. In the middle of the range sat the 2.8, quoted at 192 or 193 PS, depending on whose paperwork you are reading. It was the most popular 6 BMW put in the car at 58,000, and it is the version that appears in the period comparison tests. Mercedes sold more cars than BMW did by the time both Roadsters finished in the early 2000s. It also had longer to do it in C-Reg. Mercedes built 311,222 R170s. The Z3 total came to 297,088, which puts Mercedes just over 14,000 cars ahead and gives it the win. The SLK stayed in production for about 93 months, from July of 1996 until April of 2004. BMW had stopped building the Z3 well before that, on the 28th of June, 2002, 81 months after the first one was made. The totals divided across those run lengths put BMW at roughly 3,650 cars a month, and Mercedes at 3,350. Neither company ever published a monthly rate, so that is rough arithmetic and not a statistic, and the total still belongs to Mercedes. The press had already made up its mind. The SLK took North American Car of the Year for 1997 and went on to Car and Driver's 10 Best list the same year. The Z3 took neither. MotorWeek put both of them on a track with a Porsche Boxster. The Boxster was the slowest of the three in a straight line, at 6.7 seconds to 60 miles an hour, against 6.3 for both the Z3, 2.8, and the SLK 230. Around the circuit, the Porsche was still the best of them, and MotorWeek gave it the win, with the BMW second. Demand for the SLK ran ahead of what Mercedes had planned for, though the numbers behind that are softer than the production totals. The first production run is reported at 35,000 cars, sold out into 1998. First-year sales worldwide are put at around 55,000, which is said to be more than double what Mercedes managed across the entire run of the 190 SL. Those come from single sources rather than from the company. The two cars were not the same purchase either. The Z3's $28,750 was the cheaper way in, and an SLK asked a little over $35,000. Different model years and different base engines sit behind those two numbers, so the gap between them is not a like-for-like comparison. The market agreed with the press at the time. The collectors who came later settled on a car neither company had asked for. Burkhard Gerschel, who had run the Z3 program from the beginning, wanted a coupe. The board would not fund one. He kept early Roadster prototypes that were supposed to have gone back to the factory, and put a team together to build the coupe outside their jobs, in their own time. The engineering problem was flex. An open car with no roof structure twists under load, and the answer was to graft a shooting brake roofline onto a small two-seat sports car. They asked for permission once the car existed, and BMW showed it at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1997. Of the 297,000 Z3s, BMW built in total, 17,815 were coupes, and everything else was a Roadster. That works out at about one Z3 in every 17, and the M cars of every kind came to 21,613. There is a line repeated everywhere that the M Coupe outsold the M Roadster nearly 3-to-1. BMW's own production figures run the other way. 15,322 M Roadsters were built against 6,291 M Coupes, so the open car outsold the closed one by about 2.5-to-1. At the time, the coupe was the one that did not sell. English speakers settled on clown shoe and bread van. In Germany, it was the torn shoe, which is the word for a trainer. Hagerty's numbers, as they were reported in 2026, now make the M Coupe the most valuable Z3 of all. A Condition 3 car, which is a good driver rather than a show car, averages around $38,500, and an early one in good condition sits around $32,000. The best of them have gone much further. Concours cars have moved from around $70,000 into the high 70s, and the very best of the later S54 cars approach $140,000. The M Coupe's average is up about 20% over 5 years. All of it is a 2026 snapshot, and all of it moves around. Nothing in the SLK range has climbed the same way, including the supercharged AMG car that sat at the top of it. The clown shoe is the one collectors came back for, and Gerschel's team had built it in hours nobody was paying them for. Each company took one thing out of that fight, and 30 years later, only one of those two things still exists. The plant BMW, built in South Carolina, where the Z3 was made, has been through 7 major expansions since. It has been the largest automotive exporter by value in the United States for more than a decade running. In 2019, it shipped 246,000 X models out of the country, worth about $9.6 billion. 6 years later, it was sending fewer cars abroad for close to the same money, nearly 200,000 of them at about $9 billion. Across the years, from 2014 to 2025, the plant has exported close to 3 million vehicles, worth $113 billion. The 2,000 jobs BMW promised come from the same unaudited account as the state's incentives. More than 11,000 people work there now. The Roadster itself left. The Z4 was built at Spartanburg from 2002 until 2008, and its replacement was built at Regensburg in Germany instead. Spartanburg has been building X models ever since. Everybody copied the folding hardtop, and then one by one, they all stopped making it. Mercedes retired the SLC, the SLK's direct descendant, after the 2020 model year, and the AMG. SL that replaced it at the top of the range went back to a fabric roof. BMW's last folding hardtop, on the 4 Series, ended the same year. BMW gave weight as a reason, together with boot space and the center of gravity. Owners and specialists have kept a long list of what goes wrong on an SLK. The roof and rollover bar run on 11 hydraulic cylinders. The top lock cylinder is usually the first to go, and the pump can burn itself out if it runs dry. R170 bodies built before 2003 were not galvanized, and owners find the rear wheel arches rust first. In ordinary specification, both cars are cheap now, which is why the clown shoe stands so far out from the rest of them. Helmut Werner, who had put his name to the SLK, did not stay to see how it turned out. He lost a power struggle with Jürgen Schrempp and left in 1997. Mercedes won the car. The SLK answered the question both companies had set themselves better than the Z3 did, and Mercedes sold more cars over a longer run. BMW got the decade afterwards because the Z3 was a side effect of a much bigger bet on building cars in America, and that bet is still paying. If you're out looking at an older Roadster like these, the ebook linked in the description goes through what to check before you hand anybody money. It covers the rot that hides where you would not think to look, and the paperwork that tells you where a car has been.